Please be seated. Happy Epiphany! What a story we hear every year of these exciting times, right? So here we have these wise people. It says wise men. We translate it into 3 kings. I don't know, wise men to 3 things, how they get it. We have king's cake, we have all kinds of kings. But in the text, it actually says wise men. And if we look a little closer, it's probably more like wise ones. So wise people heard about this new king being born. And so where do you go to find a king? You go to the castle, right? You go to the big temple. You go to the big place, the fanciest house in town. And so they show up, and they go and they knock on the door, and the king comes out. They're like, "Hi, we heard there's a new king." And Herod, being Herod, was so happy that a new king was being born, because he just couldn't say, "Oh yes, this has been such a headache. Somebody take this over for me," right? Herod is afraid and frightened, and all of Jerusalem with him. In other words, all of the power structure of Herod is frightened. So he finds out a little more. He tells them where to go, where should they find this new king, and sends them off with a plan to hear where this new king is so that Herod can take care of any opposition. Off goes the wise people, and they come into a place they were not expecting, a house, a humble house with a humble family and a humble child. But something happens to these people that it changes them. They see this child, and something about this child says something is changing in the world. Something new is about to happen. A new way of being is about to be experienced. And it is at that point that they open up their treasures and they hand the baby, the child, it doesn't say baby, the child, the gifts for a king. And so at that point they say, this child is our king. This child is whom we will follow. This child is who we are going to listen to. And so in a dream, God says to them, don't listen to Herod. And because they have been changed, they can pay attention to the message. Because they have been transformed by this experience that they have had with this child, they are now able to say, oh no, we're not listening to Herod anymore. We are listening to this child and to God, right? And they go a different way. And so I ask, where are we and how are we transformed when we encounter this Jesus, this child? How are now we able to listen differently to God's dreams and God's invitation? Because of this experience we have had with this child, with this Jesus. And where could we go to say, where's this Jesus kingdom? Where is it being enacted? Where do we see it in our world? Do we see this new kingdom being enacted in our world? Have we had that experience? And as I was reflecting on this, it so happened that I was looking at my email, and I got a message from the city council member that represents my district, the district that I serve, that I live in. And they were talking about one of the things, some of the accomplishments that they have had this year, and they mentioned that in October of 2024, they raised the living wage to $21.64, right? And it brought me back to this moment back in 2015, 2016, 2017, when we, with Austin Interfaith, now Center Texas Faith congregations, got together and looked around and said, what people are making is not enough. Remember those years when the prices in Austin were getting higher and everybody wanted to live in Austin, and everybody was making millions, right? Because we are all tech employees, right? We all have, coding degrees and are all working for fancy high-tech companies, right? Well, that wasn't true. And so people who were working for the city and for the school district, people who were working regular jobs that we need done in our community, were being left behind. And so we went to the city council and we said, this is enough. Can we at least start with public employees? Can we start with the city? Have the city set the example and raise the wages. The minimum wage is a minimum wage. It's not a living wage anymore. And there was this back and forth. There was a number of years and, battles and back and forth. And people were coming out of the woodwork about how horrible this was and how it was going to destroy the economy. And the business chamber was just all over the place, newspaper articles and back and forth. But faithful people kept saying, we need a different way. We need Jesus' kingdom to be here now. And one way is for people who work, that they make enough money to feed their families. Is that so much to ask? Is that too much to ask? Yes, maybe there will be less profits for some, a little, but not enough for there's enough, there's always enough, right? And we won. We got $15 an hour in 2018. And it was this huge victory, and people were really, and if you think about that action, that event, that group of faithful people who wanted to see Jesus' kingdom now, set off something, because now the city council is looking at what is it today, and what is it today, right? So they're paying attention. There's a couple of times we've had to go and remind them, right? But it's no longer this big fight, because now that is what the expectation is, right? That people who work should be able to feed their family. And so that has changed how the city is thinking about wages. And it's not only done this for city employees, and then because then the school district had to do it, and then the county had to do it. Well, when you do those big ones, then what happens? Then other people, right? Private sectors have to keep up, right? So that really lifted people's wages. And let me tell you, I'm sure there's still grumblings out there. I'm sure there's still people talking about how unfair it is that they got to pay. But seriously, is that is what happens when people say this is wrong and we need a new way, and we follow this Jesus who believes in justice. And we act differently. We pay attention to different things, right? And so we come together to start looking and seeing where are we and what can we do to start enacting Jesus' kingdom now. And so I really think about this day and kind of launching this year, where are we in 2025? Where is St. John, and how can St. John start paying attention? We've taken a bit of a sabbatical and we haven't gone out walking the neighborhood, but I think it's that time again to go around and start looking, having conversations with our neighbors, finding out what's happening in our neighborhood schools, finding out who's moving into the neighborhood, who's moving out of the neighborhood, what is out there, and how can we start paying attention together to the things that are impacting people's lives, and what are we being called? We have many teachers in this building, some retired, some active. We have students that go to school in our public schools. How is life being impacted by them? teachers and administrators, right? We all work together for the school district, right? What's life like in 2025? And what are we being invited to? Because one of the things that I think is really interesting, that one of the commentaries that was made by a professor in Lutheran seminary is, when Jesus was born, Rome didn't go away. Right? We nod. Do we still have kings? Do we still have presidents and governors and mayors? And do they live like that psalmist in Psalm 72 about bringing righteous? Give the king your justice, O God, and your righteousness to the king's son? Do they live righteously, and do they send righteous policies? Not always, right? Not one king in all of history has modeled that Psalm 72. But what did change is that the disciples of Jesus stopped looking for a human king. They found their king. They found their king, and they found the gospel, and they lived the gospel. And that's what transformed them, and that's what transformed their community. And that's our invitation. Bishop Doyle was very clear last year. It doesn't matter who your elected officials are, because you are called to be Christians regardless of who your elected officials are. You are called to follow Jesus. You are called to follow the gospel and to put the gospel into action. That's our call. That's our invitation. And as we celebrate Epiphany, as we celebrate this moment when these wise people from not even the community of Jesus could see something new and something different breaking into the world, then let us too remember and reconnect to that Jesus. And with God's grace and God's power and God's courage, together, pay attention and bring that light of Jesus and enact that Jesus kingdom in 2025. Amen. Amen.